Hola.
Hello.
Buenas tardes. Soy Olaya Luque.
My name is Maria Luque, and I'm going to make this presentation in this very interesting Congress. And although this isn't in person, I'm going to imagine that we're all here sharing these learnings and these ideas on audio description. And you can contact me at any time because I'm going to leave you my email. And so maybe we can talk. So I hope that you enjoy the presentation. Now, based on verbal description, the audio description, but verbal description is a type of translation of the image into words. The function of audio description, this is being done in the studies of language, where people don't necessarily have a visual deficiency, but this can be for blind people, and to give a mental image of what they're saying. Now, this has been developed, and it could be for museums and television, in the theater, sports, and we're more and more present in these different areas. The modality could be in written form, the different description, and oral. That is what we're going to look at today. It could be live, it could be recorded, it could be voiceover, voice synthesis, and it could be pre-recorded, and it would be then played during the representation of theater work, for example, or other different activities. So it's very important to see why this is so important in private and public institutions, and why they're using this technique of translation or this support for people with low vision or blind people. The design for all in different institutions and museums, for example, the tendency is to make this universal, make these works universally accessible as a right. And this is something that the institutions just need to do. Now, based on this legal framework, because it's important to bear this in mind, for people who do this video description and the users, so this video description in different monuments or in the museums, in the International Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, they've included this video description for different types of museums and so forth, not just as a one-off type of support, but rather as a right for all people to participate in the cultural life of a country. In all the countries that belong to the UN, for example, and in our case, we have laws and regulations, European and national, that regulate this. So we have to implement measures so that access to television, the cinema, museums, and so forth is a right. Now, based on that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework that has been developed together with some colleagues and with the support of the ONCE organization to share content, and all this content has been evaluated and is based on research. I work at the University of Granada, and we have been working for many years researching what other countries are doing for accessibility, what we do in Spain in accessibility, what is the role of audio description in museums. And then so researching not only what is done outside, but we've developed a project. I'm going to talk about this project and how we are working. For example, we have the verbal description of the images and different scenes in different museums around Spain, where we have this verbal description for the work. And we also have tactile representation. So not only verbal, but tactile of certain elements, like diagrams. In this case, this is a diagram of a Picasso work and a Romanesque work from the 19th century, so people can touch. And also a tactile element. And this was thanks to an agreement with the ONCE organization and archaeology departments. Here we see an image where we have a reproduction, a perfect reproduction, an exact reproduction of an Iberian wolf. This was in the Jaén Museum. And in the next picture, there's a real reproductions, identical reproductions of one of the of some of the artwork in the famous Alhambra in Granada, and the key that opens the door to justice in Alhambra. So you can touch these things that are available for the public. And so we're integrating the tactile exploration, but also sound, aroma, and taste. And we have adapted workshops for different groups, in this case for people with visual disabilities, people with low vision or no vision, to round out this workshop. This could be painting, or it could be a workshop, a sensorial workshop with different pieces or creation, debate and discussion to supplement all of this. Now, within the museum, I'm going to give you some examples of museums for people with visual disabilities and what we're doing, especially in Spain, but in others as well. And the first picture you see here, this is audio description in the Soraya Museum. And we can see here in this picture, some of you will be familiar with this type of technique that we see. This is material to create diagrams where they have the image, and in this case, this is a work by Soraya with different types of so with the sense of touch, you can explore the painting. Here, this diagram, in this case, this is a Picasso painting. And these are simple things that can be done for tactile experiences. This next picture we see a diagram of how this has been created. This is the patio in the Soraya Museum, and a person exploring this with their hands, with this sense of touch. So in Granada, with the Monte Foundation, we've been working on all of these things. So with temperature-sensitive paper, we can do very interesting things. Now, Here we see an image of a tactile book. This is in New York. We also have this in Spain with raised letters and also in Braille. This is in the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. We have a diagram, a real size, full size, where you can explore and listen to an audio description. And we also have the autonomous visit with an audio guide. This is at the GBAM, and in this picture you see the audio guide in the Alhambra, and then the audio description of the Archaeological Museum as well. This has been working for many years like this. And the ONCE organization has supplemented this with a guided visit. And we'll see that in the video that I'll put in, this guided visit in just a minute, a video of that, to see how this visit is done in the Archaeological Museum. So we're going to look at the video now. This is in the National Archaeological Museum, a guided visit. So the narrator is saying how we're going to touch and experience prehistory. Talking about stone, the way the stone feels.
Así que bueno, venir por aquí que vamos a la primera estación táctil y como he dicho trata sobre la piedra.
So this is a tactile guided visit where they're talking about the feel of the stone in the Archaeological Museum. So they're talking about how they can see these artifacts, teeth, and so forth, archaeological artifacts. They're able to touch these. They're looking now at a cooking pot, an archaeological artifact. Talking about the different uses of the different types of pottery. Water jars, for example. Now they're talking about a religious scene, some artifacts left from a religious ceremony that they're describing to the visitors.
Los poquitos que podemos ver tampoco podemos distinguir bien el objeto. Las letras son muy pequeñas y eso es un arroyo. ¿Alguien sabe el vídeo que el bronce qué es?
The guide in the museum is asking the participants if they can tell what kind of material it is. It's a copper artifact. And they're talking about the creation of molds for molten metal, how things were made, and these archaeological artifacts were made. So, thanks very much for that video. In our YouTube channel, you can see videos of the other different experiences as well. But having seen this guided visit or different types of audio description that you can find in a museum, we're going to talk also about the part that is not maybe as interesting, but are the guidelines. And this is important when there's a new technique comes out, like mediation, intercultural mediation. It's very important to follow these guidelines to be able to evaluate. And the UNTE does this in many cases in many museums. They evaluate the audio descriptions that are made. There are new types of audio descriptions being created to immerse people in museums. But it's always important to keep these guidelines in mind. And for today's workshop, based on these guidelines, in the academic analysis of the guidelines, there's proposals to make these visits and just a quick summary of what these guidelines say. In the proposal created by my colleagues and myself over the last year, we start with a preparation and then application. In preparation, we send out a questionnaire. This is under ideal conditions, of course. Sometimes time constraints and so forth make it impossible to do this. A person goes to a museum and wants to have a description done immediately. But whenever it's possible, we want to know the profile of the visitor, the selection of the artworks. If we're going to create an audio guide, then we have to put together a script for people with low vision or no vision. And we're working with people from the UNTE organization, also advisors with visual disabilities. Whenever we create a project, then we have to go over this and have people with low vision evaluate it, the design and production of the images, and then the verbal guide itself. Museums spend a lot of money creating replicas, but we have to translate this whole process and teach how to explore a work of art in 3 dimensions. And it's always important to evaluate the images and the verbal guide and the description with using consultants and creators to do that. Then, in terms of application, in a guided visit, they start with the welcome, general description of the most important works, description of the building and the exhibition halls, the presentation of the artist. This can be done in different ways, more immersive ways. Maybe the participants are given a voice, and then we go to the description. Usually we describe the artist, the artistic movement, then the audio description of the work of art itself, comments from the visitors, which are very important, then the exploration. There are some people who want to first explore. We have to be flexible. Then there's comments. And then evaluation. These are some just general guidelines of how to put together the description. You describe only what it can be seen. We have to describe everything. It means values, information that is left out. Visual information, essential visual information, we have to describe and offer spatial indications as well. Tell them to where to look and to as a way to organize all the information. So we need to give a spatial orientation to the visitors. And then the organization of the exhibit itself, the lighting, the ceiling, this is all very important for the visitors. Now, in the work itself, as I said, they need information about the author, what appears in the painting, the nationality, the year, the size of the painting. All of this is important. We usually tell this at the beginning. And then a general description of the subject, the different elements in the work, the importance of the technique, the painting technique used. It's not the same to describe a woman who is an impressionist artist or a cubist. So, it's also, this could be a little bit more subjective, but in abstract art, we have to talk about the impressions that maybe an abstract work of art makes. And we need to interpret that and say, for me, it looks like this, it means this. So art is very subjective, and sometimes we have to include that in our description as well. Now, the form. We don't want to make qualitative or subjective judgments. We need to explain the place that we're identifying. If we're in the archaeological museum, we have to identify it, the type of architecture that we're looking at, why different types of artistic forms are used in this particular architecture, and so forth. We need to use varied vocabulary. It's very important to be used as varied a vocabulary as the work itself. Use specific and vivid language. Use metaphors and similes to describe the form, its different attributes. This is special to try to incorporate this multisensorial experience so that people with low vision can relate the tactile part to the visual part. That's why we need to work with people with low vision to consult before we put together these guided visits. We can talk about different visual experiences, the way that the light goes in through the window in a painting, whether it gives a warm feeling, a cold feeling. And then intangible concepts. Maybe we can explain those using analogies, for example. And to finish up, the different complements. We always have to follow up with tactile exploration if that is possible, or use other multisensorial resources, and ask questions. Ask what type of descriptions people would like to hear. Draw a distinction between description of the content and the historical context. Don't mix what we can imagine and what is objectively the description, and then ask, and ask. Now I'm going to show you a project just to give you an idea of a description. This project was done on YouTube. We'll see a video in just a moment. And this is called Access Arte, this particular program, making art more accessible. We have this audio description. So we went from the abstraction of the buffalo of Altamira, the cave painting, to figurative painting of a Dutch painter here. And then went back to abstraction of a bull. This is a Picasso bull, but it could be any type of Picasso bull. I'm going to show you the video of the bison of Altamira, the Altamira cave art. Maybe we'll just look at the first 4 minutes of the video, and we'll listen to the description with a lot of elements of sound elements and so forth, auditory elements. Access Art, a project of the Kaleidoscope organization. They bring the museum to your home. The Altamira bison was found in the Altamira cave, and with carbon-14 techniques, they say that this is about 14,500 years ago. And this was declared World Heritage in 1985. The Altamira cave is divided into 3 parts: a vestibule, a large room, and then some smaller branches. This big room, we see this bison with about 10 other paintings that cover the walls and ceiling. Now, the technique that was used was using different mineral pigmentation to put this all together. It's about 1.5 meters high and 80 centimeters from the top to the bottom. And this standing on it, we see it from a side view. And it has the figure has movement, and the surrounding area is painted with coal, and the bison itself is a red color. The pigment used was probably just this red, and the room that the bison is located in is called the polychrome room because the red and brown on the walls give a whole series of colors, different tones of red, orange, gray. Now, these pigments may come from animal blood, from coal, from stone, from the dirt, and the bison is a large animal. And give it this a block, a very simple look. Now, if we look at our left, we see this slope of the back going up to the head, and looking at, and it also has a hump drawn on the bison. And we see very thick hair on the animal as well. The legs are very thin and they're less defined. And they're surprising because the animal is so large, but there's these very thin legs. We get the abstract idea of perspective in the mind of the artist. We see that the parts of the animal closer to the spectator are larger than the other parts, so we get that perspective. We have an invisible floor that the bison is standing on as well. We have the contours of the belly of the bison are also painted. So we did stop that in the middle, but you can listen to the whole description. And then we have the description of the bull, of Picasso's bull. And we thought that this would be very interesting to contrast the two. So I hope that this has given you at least an idea of the type of audio description that we're talking about. Now, I imagine that you're all doing the activities. Instead of going through the video, I'm just going to show you a series of pictures, which are quite different. And we can see different ways to describe a painting. And then I'm going to give you my email, and you can write to me with your types. You can talk about your descriptions. This will be very interesting to then share with the Congress organizers to see the different opinions and continue researching so that audio description then becomes more developed. So imagine that you have to describe this hall where we have these works, or this other exhibition hall that you can see here in this picture, or this one in this picture. These might seem quite similar compared to the first one, but the lighting is different. This is a completely interior. There's others that have windows, or this one. This is the lion patio in the Alhambra in Granada, and this would require a completely different type of description. So we do need to situate the visitor in this space and describe it, or this space here, where you see art along the walls, and along the walls and in the furnishing and so forth. So what ideas would you have? How do you think we could do an audio description? Do you think it's essential to describe this space? All of this, I would love to hear your views on this. Now let's take a look at a description of a work. We're going to start here with the figurative part, the complex part. Here, I see several different issues or different opportunities for coaching here. Looking at this painting, there are many people, different colors, but look at the image. The image shows the Moors being cast out of Granada. There's a part that's in the shade, there's a part that's in the light. We don't have time to do the entire description. Maybe we can focus on just a couple of the characters. Or here in this picture, in this painting, this is from the Soraya Museum. Completely different style. It's still realist, but the technique is quite different from what weight do you think that needs to have in a description? Or here, in this work, you'd say, well, how can we describe this? This is a very complicated work of art. But I would like to hear your comments of how you would describe this. What would you do with the audio description of a work like this that could be very complex to describe? And here we have more abstract art. This is a Matisse piece where we can see the figures, we can recognize figures, but there is quite different. We could use analogies, maybe analogies of paper dolls, for example, where you open it up and all of a sudden you have many dolls, for example. So how can we describe the colors? Only 3 or maybe 4 colors in this painting. And in this one here, it's a very abstract piece, but I would also like to hear your description of this piece of art, of these 5 works that we have here. Maybe you can choose one or describe it. I think this is from the art museum in the New York Art Museum. And now we're going to get into more specific works of art. Description of a woman. We could just describe this painting of as a woman, but it also could be imagined in very different ways. Just thinking in Picasso, here we have different works at different times in the artistic life of Pablo Picasso, and different women that he painted. This is in blue. It's realistic, but it does have characteristics of a young Picasso. The colors are different from what we would be used to seeing in the portrait of a woman. I want to leave this kind of open so that you tell me what you think the description should be. And this is also a Picasso, from a young Picasso. Maybe it's a little bit more, has an impressionism effect here, maybe influenced from his stay in Paris. The colors, for example, they're not so defined. Different type of painting technique here. So it is a woman, 3/4 white skin, quite similar to the former one, but completely different in other aspects. And here, this is a greener Picasso. The characteristics of this woman are much more realistic. And now we get into the Picasso that we're maybe more accustomed to seeing. This woman is crying. This is his cubic period. And is a completely different portrait. How would you describe this? It's this completely different from the other one. How would you describe this work of art so that a person can get a mental image of this work of art? I would like to hear your opinions. This is another work, Picasso painting that we have here. This is of his wife, actually. And this is also from the Cubic period. His Cubist works, one of his Cubist works. But it's completely different from the previous painting. What are the differences? In your communications with me, in your email, in your comments and so forth, in your descriptions, I'd like to hear your ideas, and I'd like to hear you try to do a description of one of these works that I've showed you, or these portraits of women, and the differences. How would you strike a distinction? What are the key aspects? What are in the description to distinguish one piece, one work from another? And just to wrap up now, this is one of the women from Avignon. This looks like an African mask, actually. And I had to analyze this as part of my research, and the hand that you see next to her face, it's very, very cubist. The eyes and nose in blue, and the hand is kind of holding the face. This is from the Tate Museum in London. It could be a melon that the woman is eating, this hand. It could be a moon, a crescent moon. So there's several different options and ways to translate this cubism in this. So this is just some ideas of how you could describe this for me. And so here is my email, moic@ugr.es. So I can give you all the information you need, everything about the workshop. And we're just going to finish up here about how to move forward, how to work in a museum. I belong to the UNTE organization. Maybe you're a student, maybe you work with a technology company. How can you move forward? How can you develop these ideas? We have to look at what can be changed for the better, first of all. So look at the different things that can be improved. And there's a low percentage of people who to actually go to museums, especially people with disabilities or the elderly or children. So the general population doesn't go to museums. So we need a physical description of the building. It has to be accessible. The building has to be accessible. And there are temporary exhibits, for example. There's different timetables for visits, especially for disabled people. Some or museums organize tours in the morning for blind people, and people think that blind people are free all day, but that's not the case. People work and have family obligations. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration when we put together these types of descriptions or visits to a museum. And there are different capacities and needs and different tastes. There are people who have a little bit of vision, people who have no vision, people who cannot see colors, all kinds of different issues. And we're talking about guided visits for people with disabilities, but the museum has to be seen as a place of learning, as a place to connect with art and culture. And usually we don't evaluate. If we want to move forward, we need to evaluate at the university, at the museum, and all of the different stakeholders, and to make the museum more and more a social agent. We still have a lot of work to do in that case, so that the museum can be an engine for change. And then we have COVID. Museums have had to be reinvented. The ONTE organization has also reinvented itself, and visits need to be done in a different way. And the good news is, what do we already have? It's important to continue to do research in descriptive in descriptions, also the relationship between the university and the ONTE organization, between users. There's increasingly more research in the European Union on these topics, and active participation of people with disabilities is increasing. That's really good. They're not just consultants, but also they're creators of content now. And the different sensorial parts in the description, this is beneficial for people with visual disabilities, but for everyone. In the Alhambra, with these tactile exhibits, everyone was interested in touching them. So this is to really helps to make the museum a real motor for change, and to really create these benefits for the users. And there's a lot of success that the ONTE has had. There are more and more visitors. And increasingly, there are more people interested in visiting, making these visits more inclusive for families, groups of friends. People with low vision or no vision then are joining these groups they're being attracted now. And what else? What other things do we need to change? So I hope that you've enjoyed the workshop. I would have loved to have spoken in person with each of you, but I'm waiting for all of your descriptions, all of your participation and comments by email. And so I'd really love to hear your points of view and the things that we should be doing. So I'm going to leave here the different web pages to take a look or to get in touch with me. So thanks very much. I hope that you enjoyed that.